In the age before memory, when the earth still carried the breath of creation in every leaf and stone and current of cold mountain wind, God appointed guardians over the world. They were not men. They were not the bright seraphim who circled the throne in endless praise. They were something set apart, beings of immense power who had been given a particular task and a particular station at the boundary between the realm of heaven and the realm of earth. They were called the Erin, the Watchers, and their assignment was exactly what their name promised: to watch, to guard, to stand at the threshold between the divine and the mortal, tending to the well-being of the creatures God had made in his own image. The Watchers were not supposed to descend. They were not supposed to interfere beyond their mandate. They were not supposed to desire the things of the earth. They were appointed to be above all of that. In every sense of the word, they descended anyway. But that is not where the story begins. The story begins long before the oath was sworn, long before the first footfall on the summit of the cursed mountain, long before the first cry of a mother holding a child she could not understand. The story begins in the centuries after Eden, when the earth was still young and the wound of the first disobedience had not yet spread to every corner of the created world. Humanity was multiplying. Adam and Eve had brought children into a world that was both beautiful and broken. And those children had brought children of their own. And so the human family had spread across the face of the land like water, finding every groove and valley in the earth, pressing into every available space, filling the world with voices and fire and the smell of cultivation and the sound of tools against stone. The earth itself was extraordinary in those early centuries. The rivers ran with a clarity that has not been seen since, cold and clear from mountain springs that had never been touched by the accumulation of generations of human misuse. The forests stood so thick and deep that a man could walk for days beneath their canopy and never see the sky directly overhead. The animals moved without the learned wariness that came later, because the covenant of fear between man and beast had not yet been fully established. The seasons turned in the kind of perfect rhythm that creation exhibits when it has not been pulled too far from its design. And the air held a quality that the oldest stories describe as different from anything that exists today. A heaviness of presence, as though the membrane between the visible and invisible worlds was thinner then, and the weight of the eternal was more immediately felt on the near side of it. Two lines had emerged from the original family, moving through the same centuries like rivers flowing from the same source toward very different destinations. From Seth, the third son of Adam and Eve. Born in the shadow of Abel's murder, a people had arisen who remembered the name of the Lord. They were not perfect. Perfection had been surrendered in the garden and had not been recovered, but they remembered. They built altars on high ground and called out to heaven. They named their children with names that carried the acknowledgement of God in them. Enosh, the son of Seth, was the first man recorded to have called upon the name of the Lord in a formal and sustained way, as if establishing the practice for all who would follow him. From Enosh came Kenan, from Kenan came Mahalalel, from Mahalalel came Jared, and from Jared came the man who would become the most remarkable human being before the flood. His name was Enoch, the seventh from Adam, a man who walked with God so closely, with such consistency and depth, that one day God did not return him to the earth, and Enoch was never seen again. He was taken, translated, removed from the dying world while he still lived, as though God was keeping him close for a purpose that would unfold across the centuries. From Enoch came Methuselah, the longest-lived human being in all of Scripture, who would live 969 years and die in the very year the flood came. From Methuselah came Lamech, the father of the man the whole story was moving toward. His name was Noah, the son of Lamech, the grandson of Methuselah, the great-grandson of the man God had taken. In a world careening toward judgment, that bloodline was a thread of gold running through dark fabric. But alongside the line of Seth, the line of Cain moved through the same centuries like a shadow at noon. Cain had built a city and named it after his son Enoch, his own version of legacy, his own answer to the question of what a man without God's blessing might still accomplish through the force of will and the refusal to remain in mourning. From that city came innovations that would shape the world and haunt it simultaneously. The first tent dwellers who raised livestock across wide plains. The first musicians who filled the air with the sound of strings and pipes, capturing something beautiful in the vibration of air through shaped wood and metal. The first metal workers who learned to bend iron and bronze to the human will, who discovered that the mountain yielded its secrets to those patient enough and relentless enough to dig for them. These things were not evil in themselves. Creation is full of raw material that can be used for worship or for violence, and the human heart is the deciding factor. But the line of Cain had built its civilization without the altar, without the name, without the upward call that keeps even ordinary ambition from becoming something dangerous. Lamech, the descendant of Cain, became the first bigamist, the first man to take 2 wives in the record of Scripture, the first man to boast openly of murder in a song he composed to celebrate his own violence. He killed a man who wounded him and announced it to his wives as proof of his superiority to Cain, who had at least hidden his crime. The restraint that had made Cain dangerous only in a particular moment was entirely absent in Lamech. The violence was becoming a culture. It was becoming the air the world breathed. The watchers saw all of it from above. They had been watching since before the first human breath, and they watched still, stationed at the edge of the unseen realm, assigned to the earth but not of it. They saw the rivers and the cities and the altars and the forges and the music rising from the places of men. They saw the seasons changing and the populations growing and the 2 lines of humanity spreading further apart in character even as they drew physically closer in geography. And they saw the daughters of men. This is where the silence before the storm becomes the last moment of peace the ancient world would ever know. The one who felt it first, or at least the one who first gave it voice, was Semyaza. Semyaza was the leader of a company of watchers, a being of immense antiquity and power who had stood before the throne and been trusted with authority over a portion of the earth. He was old in ways that human language cannot contain, formed before the foundations of the world were laid. One of the morning stars who had shouted for joy when the Creator set the earth on its axis and called the seas to their boundaries. He had watched humanity from its beginning. He had seen the first tears and the first laughter, the first prayer and the first murder, the first harvest and the first fire. And somewhere in all of that watching, across the long centuries of his assignment, something had shifted in him. He had begun to see the daughters of men not as charges to be protected, not as images of the divine to be guarded with reverence, but as objects of desire. The line between watching and wanting had been crossed in secret, in the hidden interior of a being who should have had no hidden interior. He looked, and in the looking, he lingered, and the lingering became a longing, and the longing became a plan. He spoke it to his brothers. He stood among the watchers assigned with him, and he named the thing that had been unnamed in all of them. He said what none of them had said yet. "Come," he told them. "Let us choose wives from among the daughters of men and beget children with them. Let us descend." The words fell into the silence of the eternal realm and hung there. Several among them felt the full weight of what was being proposed. They felt the boundary it would cross, the incomprehensible distance between what they were and what humanity was, the violation written into the very nature of the suggestion. But the desire was not only in Semyaza, it was in all of them. And desire, once spoken aloud among willing ears, has a gravity that reason struggles to resist. Semyaza pressed further. He named his fear, that he would cross alone, that the others would change their minds once the deed was done, that he would carry the penalty of a great sin without company. He would not go first if he would fall alone. He would not be the only one. The answer came from his brothers in a form he had not expected, an oath. Let us all swear together. Let us bind ourselves by mutual curse, not to abandon this plan, not to retreat, not one of us, all of us, or none of us. And so they swore. 200 of them stood together on the summit of a mountain in the northern borderland, where the air was thin and the stars were hard as iron. And they bound themselves by an oath that no power in the created order could undo. They called the mountain by a word derived from cherem, the word for curse and consecrated destruction. Mount Hermon, the mountain of the oath, the mountain of the curse. The name itself was a scar on the geography of the earth, a permanent memorial to the moment 200 beings of light chose to step off the edge of their divine station and fall. Their leaders had names that each carried an echo of the god they were abandoning. Semyaza stood at their head, he whose name meant that God has seen, an irony the ages would make devastating. With him were Arakiel, who held knowledge of the signs of the earth; Kokabel, whose name carried the word for star, who understood the movements of the heavens; Tamiel and Ramiel; Daniel, a name that would appear later in a prophet of different character entirely; Ezekiel; Barakijal, who knew the mysteries of lightning and the secrets of storms; Asael, who would come to bear a different name before his story was done, a name that would be written over all the sin of the world; Almaros, who understood enchantments and how to resolve them; Batariel and Ananiel; Zakiel, Samsapil and Satariel; Turel and Jomjael; Sariel, each of them a captain over 10. Together commanding 200 beings of power that no human measurement can calibrate, each one stepping off the edge of the divine order and into the free fall of a choice that would echo for every generation that followed. The night they descended, the world below did not know what was coming. There was no earthquake to announce it, no trumpet, no voice from heaven warning the daughters of men to close their doors and stay inside. The 200 came down in human form, fitting themselves into the shape of flesh, the way water takes the shape of whatever vessel it is poured into. They walked into the world of men, carrying with them a quality of presence that was not entirely containable in the bodies they had chosen, a remnant of celestial nature that showed in the way they moved, and in the quality of their eyes, and in the particular way that light seemed to fall on their faces differently than it fell on the faces of men. The daughters of men saw them, and the daughters of men were drawn to them the way iron is drawn to a lodestone, by a force they felt in their bodies before their minds could form a question about its source. The Watchers took from among the daughters of men any they chose. They did not ask, they did not court. The language of the ancient record is the same language used for Cain's violence, the same language used for every act of grasping in the first chapters of Genesis. They saw, they took, unions were formed. Women who had known only human men found themselves bound to beings who were not human, who carried in them the weight and depth of an eternity they had abandoned, but not entirely escaped. Children were conceived. But before the children came, another transgression was layered upon the first like stone upon stone in a wall being built against the sky. The Watchers began to teach. Asael, who would come to be known as Azazel, began with metal. He opened the knowledge of the earth's hidden veins, the ore buried in the mountains, the process of extraction and smelting and shaping that turns raw stone into an edge. He taught men to mine iron, to work copper and bronze into sheets and forms, to fashion swords with a specific angle of the blade that maximized the depth of a wound, to make shields that could turn an edge, to create breastplates that could absorb the force of a blow that would otherwise shatter bone. He taught warfare as a craft, as a technical discipline, as something that could be refined and improved and passed down to sons who would improve it further. He taught the women the arts of adornment, how to weave gold and silver into jewelry that turned beauty into a display and a weapon simultaneously, how to paint the eyes with materials that darkened and enlarged them, how to use the body as a statement about what the body was worth. These things seem like small corruptions when named one by one. But Azazel was not naming them one by one. He was pouring all of it into a world that had been building toward violence for generations, a world where the restraint of natural limitation was the only thing slowing the descent into chaos. He removed the restraint. While Azazel taught warfare and the seduction of vanity, the others opened their own compartments of forbidden knowledge. Kokabel taught the reading of the stars, not as praise to the Creator who placed them there, but as a system for predicting fate and circumventing the divine will, turning the heavens from a testimony into a tool of divination. Barakijal opened the mysteries of lightning and the movements of weather, teaching men to read what had been meant as signs of divine power, as though they were merely natural data that could be exploited for human advantage. Armaros taught the resolving of enchantments, the techniques for dismantling the protective barriers woven into creation. Arakiel taught the signs of the earth, how to read the ground for knowledge that had been sealed away. Zariel opened the movements of the moon and their relationship to the cycles of human and natural life, turning sacred rhythm into occult leverage. Others taught root cutting, the use of plants in magical medicines and incantations that called on forces outside the order that creation had been established upon. Enchantments, divination, the whole vast architecture of forbidden knowledge poured out into the world like a dam giving way before water that has been building for too long, and humanity drank it in. The world that had existed before the Watcher's descent was already broken by the sin of the first garden, but it had retained an orientation, a North Star. Even in its brokenness, it had been moving in a direction that still pointed toward restoration, still contained the seed of the promise spoken in Eden that the woman's offspring would one day crush the head of the serpent. The Watcher's descent and the knowledge they spread did not break the world's orientation. They reversed it. What had been moving slowly toward restoration began moving rapidly toward a final destruction from which there would be no natural recovery, only a supernatural one. The world changed. In the settlements near where the Watchers had made their homes, something new appeared in the air and the atmosphere of daily life. The sound of iron being worked over fire, a sharp metallic ring that had not existed before. The smell of smelted ore hanging over hillsides that had previously smelled only of grass and rain. Men who had once settled disputes with fists or with stones now had edges that extended their reach and multiplied the lethality of their anger. The art of killing became a discipline. Those who were skilled at it became feared. Those who were feared became powerful. And power in that world, in that time, without the anchor of the covenant, without the weight of the law, without the upward pull of worship keeping it in proportion, became an appetite that fed on itself. But the most terrible change was still growing. In the houses of the women who had been taken by the Watchers, something was wrong with the pregnancies from the beginning. The women felt it without being able to name it, something too large, pressing against the boundaries of what a human body could contain, something too hungry before it had drawn its first breath. The births, when they came, were terrible in ways the world had never encountered, because what was pushing its way into the world through these women was not entirely the same as what had entered them. It was something new, something for which the earth had no category, no precedent, no preparation. The children were giants, Not giants in the way the word softens when spoken too often, not merely large men or unusually tall ones. Giants in the full, ancient, terrifying weight of the word. The Nephilim, the fallen ones, the mighty ones, the men of renown. They grew at rates that defied everything observable about human biology. Infants who reached the size of grown men within months. Children who consumed what a family ate in a week before the sun had moved from morning to midday. They grew and they grew and they kept growing. And the communities around them watched this growth with a mixture of awe and the first thin edge of a fear they could not yet name. They were magnificent in their way. Songs were composed about them. Their deeds were recorded in the oral tradition of that age. They were called the heroes, the mighty ones, the men of renown. Their names were spoken with a reverence that had previously been reserved for the divine. But the reverence did not last. The Nephilim's hunger was the first sign of what they truly were beneath the magnificence. It began with food, and it began reasonably enough. These were enormous beings who required enormous amounts of sustenance, and the communities around them gave what they could because there was a logic to feeding a protector, a logic to maintaining the goodwill of something that could level a settlement in an afternoon. But the appetite of the Nephilim was not the appetite of bodies that had natural limits. It was the appetite of something born between two orders of existence, carrying in its biology the insatiable quality of the divine realm's excess, crossed with the consuming nature of fallen human desire. They ate everything that was set before them. They stripped fields before harvest. They emptied granaries in a single visitation. The communities bent under the weight of feeding them and could not straighten again. When the cultivated food ran out, they turned to the animals. When the animals were not enough, they turned to men. The ancient record does not soften this. It states it plainly, the way a wound is stated plainly when the healer needs to know its depth. The Nephilim ate the flesh of men and drank their blood. They committed sins against every creature that breathed, against birds and fish and cattle and wild things, devouring what had been given to them as stewardship and turning the earth's provision into an expression of contempt for every boundary the Creator had established. The communities of men who had welcomed them, who had told their children the names of these magnificent giants with a kind of terrible pride, found themselves instead hiding their children when the shadows of enormous figures fell across their thresholds. The violence spread. Where one giant had devoured, others learned. Where one community's cry had gone unanswered, another's rose to join it. And then another, and the accumulation of cries became a sound that the earth itself was making. A groan from the ground upward, the voice of creation testifying against what had been done to it. The earth filled with blood. In the valleys and along the rivers, where communities of Seth's descendants had built their altars and taught their children the name of the Lord, the altars were knocked over or ignored. The elders who had kept the flame of memory alive were silenced one way or another by violence or by the slow attrition of living in a world that had stopped making any space for what they represented. The prayers stopped rising. The sound of worship that had gone up from the earth like incense was replaced by the sound of screaming and the sound of the Watcher's forbidden knowledge being practiced in the darkness and the sound of the earth's groaning under the weight of what had been done to it. Generation after generation of children were born into a world where the Nephilim cast shadows over everything and the knowledge of war was the highest form of learning available to them, where every innovation was in the service of violence, where the image of God in men had been so systematically pressed down that most people alive in those final generations before the flood had no framework for understanding what the image of God was or that they were carrying it. The ancient record says it simply and completely. The Lord saw that the wickedness of man was great in the earth, and that every intention of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continuously. Not sometimes, not mostly, only evil, continuously. Without pause, without exception, without a single moment in which the heart of the world turned upward. The corruption that had begun with the Watchers' descent had spread through the knowledge they had brought, through the children they had fathered, through the example of powerful beings living without shame in a world that had lost its orientation. The infection had moved through humanity the way water moves through soil, touching everything, leaving nothing entirely unchanged. God looked down from heaven and saw what his creation had become. The text uses a word that stops every reader cold. It says, he grieved. The creator of the universe, the one who had spoken light into being and set the stars in their courses and breathed life into the dust and called everything he had made very good, that God looked at the world he had made and was grieved to his heart. There is no greater testimony in all of Scripture to how catastrophically wrong things had gone. Not merely disappointed, not merely displeased, grieved to his heart. The full weight of that phrase is a measure of the full weight of the catastrophe, but in the midst of all of it, one man remained. His name was Noah, the son of Lamech, the grandson of Methuselah, the great-grandson of Enoch, who had walked so close to God that God had simply taken him. In a world where every thought of every heart was only evil continuously, Noah was righteous, blameless in his generation, a man who walked with God the way his great-great-grandfather had walked with God, in the same intimacy and trust, in the same daily orientation toward the one whose face everything else in the world had turned away from. To be righteous in that world was not merely a personal virtue. It was a cosmic defiance. Noah stood against the entire weight of a civilization that had been corrupted from the inside out, and he remained upright. He found favor in the eyes of God. But what was happening above the world, in the realm where the angels who had not fallen still stood before the throne and watched what their brothers had done? That was the hidden engine of what was about to unfold. If this story is opening something in you, a hunger for the ancient truth, a desire to understand the deeper battle behind the surface of history, subscribe now and turn on notifications. Every narrative on this channel is a journey through the sacred pages. And what comes next in this story, what God speaks from the throne when the cries of the earth finally reach heaven, is something that will change the way you see everything. The archangels were watching. Michael, whose name is itself a challenge, who is like God, the name that answers every false claim to divinity, stood among his brothers and saw the earth below. He saw the violence and the blood and the towers of the Nephilim, casting long shadows over communities of cowering men, and his understanding of what he was seeing was total and precise. Raphael, the healer of God, saw the wounds the earth was carrying and felt in himself the full and specific knowledge of what healing would require and what it would cost. Gabriel, whose name carries the word for strength, looked at the violence that had been unleashed by the descendants of beings who were themselves strong beyond human comprehension, and felt the weight of what it meant to be strong in the service of righteousness, rather than in the service of appetite. Uriel, the flame of God, looked at the darkness and understood its dimensions. They came before the Most High. The four archangels brought their testimony to the throne of the Most High, and they did not come to accuse or to demand. They came to testify. They described what they had witnessed in precise and devastating detail. The souls of men crying out from the earth, the voices of those who had been consumed, rising from the ground like smoke from a fire that had not yet been put out. The cry of the blood spilled on the earth, the sound of creation itself groaning under the accumulated weight of everything that had been done to it. The names of the Watchers who had crossed the boundary, the nature of the knowledge they had spread, the size and violence of the children they had fathered. The archangels laid all of it before the throne without embellishment and without minimization. And the throne heard every word, and the Most High answered. The voice that had spoken light into being, that had named the stars and set the boundaries of the sea, spoke again, and this time what it spoke was judgment. The first word went to Raphael. Raphael was given a command and an assignment. Bind Azazel hand and foot, cast him into the darkness, go to the desert of Dudael, the desolate and forsaken place at the edge of the habitable world, and make an opening there. Cast Azazel into that opening and place upon him rough and jagged rocks. Cover him with the darkness. Seal his face so that he cannot see light. He will remain there until the day of the great judgment, when the fire will receive him and his accounting will be complete. All sin, the voice said, was to be written over Azazel. It was through his teachings that the earth had been corrupted to its core, and the healing of the earth would begin with his binding. Raphael departed from the throne with his assignment, and the movement of that departure through the spiritual realm was felt in the foundations of things, the way a deep bell is felt in the bones before it is heard by the ears. Then the word came to Gabriel. Gabriel was sent against the Nephilim, against the children of the Watchers, the children of the forbidden unions, the ones who had eaten the world and found it insufficient. The method was specific and terrible in its elegance. Turn them against each other. The violence that had always been in them and had always been directed outward against humanity, against animals, against the created order, was to be redirected inward. Set them fighting among themselves. The children of violence would be undone by their own violence. The children of consumption consumed by each other. No external army could have accomplished this. No human force could have stood against the Nephilim and prevailed. But the Nephilim could stand against each other. Gabriel was to ignite the rage that burned constantly in them and give it a new target, and the result would accomplish the cleansing of the earth that nothing else could achieve. Their fathers would watch the destruction of their beloved children, the voice said, and would be powerless to stop it. And in that grief, the full weight of the choice they had made would come upon them with a completeness that could not be escaped. Then the word came to Michael. Michael was given the most comprehensive assignment of all. Bind Semyaza and all his associates, all the Watchers who had united themselves with women and defiled themselves with them. Bind them for 70 generations in the valleys of the earth. Imprison them in the deep darkness, away from the face of the light. Keep them there until the day of judgment and of consummation, when they will be led from their chains to the fire. Not the fire of ordinary destruction, but the fire at the end of all things, where the final sentence of the Most High is executed on everything that chose rebellion over the order it was given to uphold. And then the word came to Uriel. Go to the son of Lamech. Go to Noah. Tell him in my name. Hide yourself. Reveal to him the end that is approaching. Tell him that the whole earth will be destroyed, that a deluge is coming, that will cover the face of the world and destroy everything on it. Tell him how to escape. Tell him how to preserve his seed for all the generations that will come after the cleansing, so that from him the world can begin again. The assignments were received, the messengers departed, and the world below continued its terrible descent, not yet knowing that the answer to its groaning was already in motion in the unseen realm, moving toward it with the inevitability of everything decreed from the throne. Raphael descended on Azazel, the being who had taught humanity to make weapons, who had opened the technology of war and the aesthetics of seduction and the ornament of vanity, who had poured into the world below the accelerant that had brought the fire of human sin to its final temperature. Azazel was taken. Raphael bound him hand and foot. The binding was not figurative, the chains were real. And Azazel was cast into the opening in the desert of Dudael, and rough and jagged rocks were placed upon him, and the darkness sealed around him, and his face was turned away from the light. In that darkness he remains, awaiting the day when the fire receives what the fire is owed. The angel who had taught the world to make swords could not cut through what held him. The angel who had taught women to make themselves beautiful had his own face covered in the dark. The earth began to breathe differently. Not fully. Not yet. The Nephilim were still walking. Gabriel moved among the giants. Something shifted in the camps of the Nephilim like a change in the weather before a storm. When the pressure drops and the animals go quiet and the air takes on a particular stillness that contains within it the promise of violence. The rage that had always been in the Nephilim, the insatiable, consuming, outward-facing rage that had been the signature of their existence. Something redirected it. The giants looked at each other, and in each other they saw what they had always seen in men, something to be consumed, something to be dominated, something in the way. They turned on each other with the same appetite and the same force they had turned on the world. The sound of it was the sound of the earth cracking. Giants in full combat was not a small event. These were beings who had been fathered by watchers, who had been born in violation of the fundamental boundary between the orders of creation, who had grown to sizes that defied the logic of the world they inhabited, who had spent their lives exercising a violence that nothing had been able to stop. When they turned that violence on each other, the earth shook. Valleys were reshaped by the impacts of enormous bodies falling. Rivers ran brown and thick from the disturbance of their banks. The forests in the regions where they fought became wastelands of splintered wood and turned earth. The communities of men who had lived in terrified proximity of the Nephilim heard the sounds of the battle and did not understand what was happening, only that something enormous was tearing itself apart in the distance. And for the first time, in as long as any of them could remember, the destruction was not aimed at them. The Nephilim fell, not in a single catastrophic moment, not all at once or quickly. The dying of the Nephilim unfolded over time, each one meeting the end at the hands of another who was equally capable of delivering it, the mighty men of renown destroying each other in the battles that the ancient world would remember and reshape into legend. They fell one by one and in groups, and the earth received their enormous bodies and was horrified and healed simultaneously, rid of a burden it had never been designed to carry. The watchers who had fathered them watched all of this. They had wanted descendants. They had wanted to create something, to make something that carried them in the world they had abandoned their station to enter. And they watched the destruction of everything they had made, helpless to intervene, bearing the weight of the grief that had been promised them. They had desired children, and they received the watching of their children's destruction, and in that watching the full accounting of their choice was presented to them without mercy and without end. Then Michael came for them. The binding of Semyaza and his host is one of the most significant events in the invisible history of the world, an event that most generations know nothing about, that passes without notice in the daily machinery of ordinary human life, but that shapes the contours of the spiritual war that has been ongoing since before the flood. Michael bound them. The valleys of the earth became their prison. The same word used for Azazel's binding applies here as well. Chains, chains of darkness, chains in the deep and hidden places, chains forged not of metal, but of divine judgment. Chains that will not yield until the final day when the throne rises to execute the last sentence on everything that has stood against the order of the Most High. The testimony of this binding is preserved in the New Testament in two places that corroborate each other with the precision of witnesses who were present. Jude wrote it plainly. Angels who did not keep their proper place, who abandoned their own dwelling, God has kept in eternal chains under gloomy darkness until the judgment of the great day. Peter confirmed it. God did not spare angels when they sinned, but cast them into chains of gloomy darkness to be kept until the judgment. And in the same breath, he connected this to the days of Noah and to the flood that followed. The chains are real. The darkness is real. The judgment is approaching. These were not poetic consolations offered to frightened ancient people. They were testimony from those who knew the matter from the inside. The watchers were bound, but the world remained to be addressed. The text of Genesis describes what the earth had become with a precision that is almost clinical in its completeness. God saw the earth, and it was corrupt. All flesh had corrupted its way upon it. The earth was filled with violence. The infection that had entered the world through the Watchers' descent had spread through the knowledge they had transmitted, through the children they had fathered, through the example of powerful beings living without limit or shame in a world that had lost its North Star. By the time the Nephilim fell and the Watchers were sealed in their chains, the human world had been so thoroughly corrupted that removing the original sources of corruption was not sufficient. The world itself had internalized what had been brought into it. It needed more than surgery. It needed cleansing. It needed water. God spoke to Noah with a directness and completeness that left no ambiguity. "I have determined to make an end of all flesh," he said. "For the earth is filled with violence through them. Behold, I will destroy them with the earth." These words did not come from anger the way human anger comes, hot and unreasonable. They came with the grief still present, the grief and the judgment together, held in the hands of a God who loved what he had made and could not allow what it had become to continue. A God whose patience was not the absence of judgment, but the presence of mercy, and whose mercy had a limit defined by his own holiness. God gave Noah the instructions, the ark. Its dimensions recorded in the text with the specificity of an architect rather than a storyteller. 300 cubits in length, 50 cubits in width, 30 cubits in height. 3 decks, a door in the side, a window above, wood from the gopher tree, coated within and without with pitch so that no water could enter, no seam would give, no joint would fail under the weight of what was coming. The ark was not a symbol or a parable. It was engineering. It was survival infrastructure. It was the vessel through which the Creator intended to carry everything worth carrying, through the end of one world and into the beginning of the next. For 120 years, the judgment was withheld. 120 years during which Noah built and warned and continued building even when the warning produced only mockery. He preached righteousness, the record says, which means he spoke the truth about what was coming to people who had no framework for receiving it. There is a particular kind of loneliness reserved for those who warn about things no one believes are coming. Noah carried that loneliness for over a century. He woke every morning and looked at the sky and went back to work on the ark, hammering pitch into the seams of wood in the smell of resin and sawdust, measuring the decks and the pens and the dimensions that had been given to him with the specificity of divine engineering. His sons worked beside him. His wife kept the household together through the years, and the world around him was doing what the world around him had always done: eating and drinking, giving and taking in marriage, building and planting and pursuing every appetite in the language of ordinary life, not one of them understanding that the ordinary life they were living was a borrowed life, time given by the patience of the one they had collectively abandoned. They did not believe the man with the hammer and the message. They could not hear the warning for the noise of their own living. The ark took shape over those 120 years, enormous and impossible by ordinary accounting, rising from the landscape as something that had no precedent and no obvious purpose, visible to those who were not inside the conversation between Noah and the God who had given him the plans. Noah's neighbors saw a man building a ship in a place with no sea. They saw the absurdity. They did not see the grace. When the ark was finished, God spoke again. "Come inside," he said, "you and your household, because you I have found righteous before me in this generation." Then the animals came. The record describes this in a way that suggests compulsion rather than training, as if the created order was responding to something older and deeper than the behavior of individual species. They came in pairs of every kind, 7 of the clean and 2 of the unclean, filing into the ark with the quiet inevitability of water finding its level. Noah brought them in, then the door closed. The record is specific on this point. It was God who closed the door, not Noah, not one of his sons. God himself sealed the entrance between the inside and the outside, between the preserved and the perishing, between the world that was ending and the world that would begin. The sealing of the door was an act of divine finality, and it had a meaning that no one standing outside in that moment could fully receive. The door was closed. 7 days of silence followed. 7 days during which the world outside continued exactly as it had been, unaware that the threshold had already been crossed, that the verdict had already been sealed, that the decision had already been made and confirmed and locked. 7 days of eating and drinking, 7 days of ordinary life in a world that had lost its last chance without knowing it. 7 days. Then the fountains of the great deep broke open, and the windows of heaven were opened, and the rain came down on the earth for 40 days and 40 nights. The water rose, the cities that had been built over the centuries, the cities where the Watcher's forbidden knowledge had been practiced, and where the Nephilim had moved like lords over terrified populations. The water took them. The altars where men had once called on the name of the Lord, and the places where they had afterward called on other things entirely, the water took those too. The high places, the valleys between them, the mountain passes, the plains, all of it went under the water as the level rose and did not stop rising, until the record says it covered the highest mountains by 15 cubits, until there was no surface of the dry land left visible anywhere on the face of the earth. There was nowhere to go. There was nothing above the water except the sky and the ark. The ark floated above the ruin of everything that had been before, above the place in the desert where Azazel was bound in the rocks, above the valleys where the chains of the Watchers held in the darkness, above every city and every altar and every forge and every field and every bed where a Watcher had taken what was not his. Above all of it, the ark rode the surface of the judgment, carrying inside it the future of the world. 150 days. Then God remembered Noah. The text uses this phrase in the Hebrew sense, not the sense of having forgotten and now recalling, but the sense of active attention turning toward a specific beloved. God turned his attention toward Noah, and he caused a wind to pass over the earth, and the waters began to recede. The fountains of the deep were closed. The windows of heaven were shut. The rain stopped. The water fell back by degrees, retreating from the high places first and then from the lower ground, uncovering the mountains one by one, like features emerging from beneath a cloth slowly pulled aside. On the 17th day of the 7th month, the ark came to rest on the mountains of Ararat. Noah sent out a raven. It went back and forth until the waters had dried up. He sent out a dove. The dove came back with nothing in her feet, for the water was still on the face of the earth. He waited 7 days and sent the dove again. It returned with an olive leaf freshly plucked, and Noah knew that the waters had receded enough for trees to breathe. He waited 7 more days and sent the dove a 3rd time, and it did not return. He opened the covering of the ark and looked out at a world washed clean. The smell that came in was the smell of wet earth and the green of new growth and the complete absence of everything that had been too long in the old world. The smell of beginning, the smell of creation taking a breath after a very long time of holding it. God spoke to Noah from outside the ark. "Come out," he said, "you and your wife and your sons' wives." Bring out every living thing with you, the birds and the animals, and every creature that moves on the earth, that they may swarm on the earth and be fruitful, and multiply on the earth. Noah came out. His wife came out, his sons and their wives. The animals came out, every kind and every pair, spilling out onto the new earth like water released from a container, spreading immediately into the world with the instinct of things that understand their purpose. Noah built an altar. He took from every clean animal and every clean bird and offered burnt offerings on the altar, the first act of worship on the new earth, the first smoke rising from the new world toward heaven, and God made a covenant. The rainbow appeared in the sky, arching over the new earth like a bridge between the grief of what had been and the hope of what would be. The covenant was spoken in plain terms. Never again will a flood destroy every living creature. Never again will there be a flood to destroy the earth. The sign in the sky was the seal on the promise. Every time rain fell and the clouds parted and the colored arch appeared above the wet world, it was the same promise renewed. I remember the covenant between God and every living creature of all flesh that is on the earth. The world was new. The line through which the Messiah would come had been preserved in the three sons of Noah: Shem, Ham, Japheth. From Shem would come the line that the whole story had been moving toward since the first promise spoken to the first couple in the first garden, the promise that the seed of the woman would crush the head of the serpent. That line would carry the promise through centuries and disasters and exiles and empires, through Abraham and Isaac and Jacob, through Judah and Boaz and Ruth, through Jesse and David, through the exile and the return, all the way to the manger in Bethlehem, where the seed of the woman finally arrived in the world in the form of a child who would grow up to crush every chain. The watchers remained in their chains in the valleys of the earth. Azazel remained sealed in the darkness of Dudael, with rough and jagged rocks pressing him down. His face turned from the light. They would remain there, both of them, until the day when the final judgment is executed and the fire receives what the fire is owed. The chains have not been broken, the darkness has not been lifted, the judgment has not yet fully come, but it is coming. And its arrival is as certain as the flood was certain before it arrived. The Nephilim were gone from the earth. Their bodies had been taken by the flood. Their enormous frames returned to the earth they had terrorized, dissolved back into the soil they had never treated as sacred ground. But what is born of a being that does not die is not entirely mortal. And the text and the tradition agree on this. The disembodied spirits of the Nephilim did not go to the place where the dead go. They were not permitted to enter heaven because of what they were. They were not permitted to enter the realm of the dead because that was not their nature either. They were confined to the earth, to wander in the dry places without bodies, seeking habitation, driving men toward the violence and impurity and craving that had been the nature of their fathers and the culture of their brief and terrible existence. What the world would come to call by different names in different ages: unclean spirits, wandering demons, the voices in the waste places. These were the remnant of a race that should never have been born. The spiritual inheritance of the oath on Mount Hermon. The war was not over. It has never been over. The one who was born centuries later into the line of Noah, of Shem, of Abraham, of David, he came into the world with full knowledge of the war that had begun before the flood. He knew about the chains in the valleys. He knew about Azazel, sealed in the desert. He knew about the spirits that wandered the dry places, seeking rest and finding none. When he cast out unclean spirits in the villages of Galilee, when he stood at the tombs in the region of the Gerasenes and spoke to the legion that cried out from inside a man who had no help left from any human source. When he commanded the spirits and they obeyed him, he was operating in the full authority of one who knew every dimension of the war and had come specifically to end it. He was the seed of the woman. He was the one the promise had always pointed toward. When he died and was placed in the tomb and descended to the realm of the dead, Peter records that he went and made proclamation to the spirits in prison, to those who had been disobedient in the days of Noah. The Son of God went to the watchers in their chains and announced his victory, not to liberate them. The chains remain. The judgment is still coming. He went to announce, "It is finished." The line you tried to corrupt has produced the one who was always going to crush every claim you ever made. The oath on Mount Hermon has been answered by a different oath, spoken from the cross, sealed with blood that was worth more than the blood of every giant that ever walked the earth. He rose from the dead. The chains remain on the watchers. Azazel is still in the dark of Dudael, still under the rough and jagged rocks, still waiting for the fire. The Nephilim spirits still wander the earth, still pressing against the windows of human weakness, still seeking what they sought when they were alive. But the one who rose from the dead holds the keys of death and of the realm of the dead. And every chain in every darkness answers to him. And the judgment he declared is the judgment that is coming. Every generation since Noah has been given the same warning, and the warning has come most pointedly from the lips of the one who rose from the dead. As it was in the days of Noah, he said, so it will be at the coming of the Son of Man. They were eating and drinking, giving and taking in marriage, until the day Noah entered the ark. They did not know until the flood came and swept them all away. The story is ancient. The warning is today. You have stood at the edge of the abyss of what happened before the flood, and you have looked in. And it is possible that somewhere in this story, in the telling of what the Watchers chose, and what the Nephilim became, and what the earth suffered, and what God did about it, something looked back at you, not from the darkness, from the mirror. The Watchers did not fall because they were weak. They were not weak. They were beings of immense power and long history, formed before the foundations of the world, trusted with a station that no human being has ever been assigned. They had seen the glory of the Most High at close range. They knew the weight of what they were abandoning. Their fall began not with a failure of strength, but with a failure of attention. They allowed themselves to see what they were not supposed to dwell upon, and in the dwelling, desire took root. That is the precise sequence. They saw, they lingered. The lingering became longing. The longing became a plan. The plan became an oath. The oath became a descent. And the descent became the worst catastrophe in the history of the created world. Desire, once it roots, does not remain small. It grows in the dark, the way certain plants grow in the dark, finding no light to orient toward, and so growing in every direction simultaneously, pressing against every wall, finding every crack. It reasons with you. It finds the justification you needed. It gathers allies. Semyaza said he feared to bear the penalty alone, and so he built a coalition of the willing, turning what had been a private temptation into a corporate commitment. 200 beings of light, who had been given charge over the world, traded their assignment for their appetite, and the world paid the price for that trade for generations. This story reaches across every century and every culture, and lands in the specific circumstances of your life today, in the particular geography of your faithfulness and your temptation and your assignment. You have an assignment. It was given to you by the same God who appointed the Watchers over the ancient earth. The assignment may be your marriage, the covenant you made before witnesses, and before the God who was present when the covenant was spoken. It may be your calling, the particular work you were created to do that no one else can do in quite the same way. It may be your role as a parent, the stewardship of a child's early formation that cannot be undone and cannot be transferred. It may be your integrity in a situation where dishonesty would be profitable and easy and unlikely to be discovered. Whatever shape it takes, the assignment is specific to you and it is sacred. and it requires that you remain in your proper place, that you not abandon your dwelling, that you not step off the edge of your station in pursuit of what is below you. The boundary is not a punishment. The boundary is where you remain what you were made to be. The Watchers abandoned their proper dwelling. They left the high, holy, eternal heaven for the daughters of men. They chose the temporary over the eternal, the appetite over the assignment, the beautiful and forbidden over the glorious and given. And the terrible and honest truth is that they did not choose poorly out of ignorance. They chose poorly with full knowledge of what they were leaving behind. They had seen the throne. They had sung with the morning stars. They knew exactly what they were trading. Today, the world is full of voices that will tell you the boundary is merely a limitation imposed by the small-minded and the afraid. That desire is a compass and should be followed wherever it leads. That the rules are for those who lack the courage to take what they want. These are not new arguments. These are the arguments that were made on the summit of Mount Hermon before the oath was sworn, dressed in the language of the present age. The Watchers believed them. The Watchers acted on them. And then they watched their beloved children murder each other in the valleys below. And then Michael came, and the chains went on. And the chains have not come off. But here is the other side of the story. The side that does not let itself be forgotten. The God who chained the Watchers is the same God who closed the door of the ark for Noah. The same God who pronounced judgment without hesitation was grieved to his heart before he pronounced it. The same God who sealed Azazel in the rocks sent Uriel to Noah before the first drop of rain fell. He is patient, he warns, he provides a way of escape before the escape route is needed. His patience is not the absence of judgment, it is the presence of mercy. And his mercy is real, and it is available, and it was made fully available at the cross, where the seed of the woman crushed every head that needed crushing. Noah built the ark. He built it in a world that mocked him, in a world where the Nephilim were still casting shadows and the Watchers' forbidden knowledge was still being practiced in the firelight, and every thought of every heart was only evil continuously. He kept building, plank by plank, day by day, year after year, through 120 years of doing the thing he had been told to do in the face of a world that had entirely decided he was wrong. The ark was finished. The door was closed, the water came, and the ark floated. Every day of faithfulness is a plank in the ark. Every day of choosing obedience over desire, choosing the assignment over the appetite, choosing to remain in your proper dwelling rather than abandoning it for the beautiful and forbidden. Every one of those days is a plank in the vessel that will float when the water rises. The question is never whether judgment arrives. The water always comes. The question is whether you are inside the ark or outside it when God closes the door. The Watchers are still in their chains. Azazel is still in the dark. The judgment is still coming. But the covenant is still in the sky after every rain, and the line of Noah produced the one who made a way for every person who has ever lived to step inside before the door closes. That way is still open. The invitation is still extended. The ark is still being built, and there is room inside it for everyone who chooses faithfulness over desire, assignment over appetite, the high and holy and eternal over the beautiful and forbidden and passing. The story of the Watchers is not only the story of angels who fell, it is the story of what God does when the world breaks in ways that appear to be beyond repair. He repairs it. He repairs it at great cost and with great grief and with a faithfulness to his own purposes that no rebellion in heaven or on earth has ever been able to interrupt. The flood came, the chains went on, but Noah survived. The line held. The Messiah came. Death was defeated. The door is open. Step inside. If this story has touched your heart today, write in the comments. I choose obedience over desire. That single declaration carries more weight than it may seem to carry, because it is not just a comment on a video, it is the answer to the oath sworn on Mount Hermon. It is the opposite of what 200 beings said to each other on a cold summit before the world changed. The Watchers said, "We choose desire over assignment." Your declaration says something entirely different. And in the economy of a God who keeps records and who names every star and who noted that Noah was righteous in his generation, that declaration is noted, it is seen, it is received. Write it, mean it, and build the ark.